Well, good morning. Good morning, friends online, and good morning, friends that are here. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that may be of interest, and it may be a little controversial among Quakers, or it may not be controversial for that matter. When I started talking about doing this, I was talking to my wife, who's been with me throughout this entire career. In fact, plays a little bit of a role in it. And she reminded me the conversations we had in 1980 when I was up with North Carolina Power and Light to be a part of the startup component for Sharon Harris Nuclear Power Plant in New Hill, North Carolina, which is where we lived. Actually, it wasn't where we lived. We lived in Asheville. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my history. When I talk about the past, it may be my history. So 1980, I was offered a job. We had just moved back from Colorado where we had gotten married. And I was offered a job with Progress and then Carolina Power and Light to be part of the startup and the operational crew for Sharon Harris Nuclear Power Plant. There were two other factors that went on in my life at that particular moment. One, we had just moved back. I had just finished my income tax and we owed $900 to the federal government. And two, I'll never forget that morning that I got up and looked at that little brown donut and we found out we were also pregnant. So I was looking for a job. And that said, when this job came, Chris reminds me of the discussions and the soul searching and the thoughts that went in, because 1980 was 1 year after 3 Mile Island 2 event. So all of that said, as we go through today, one thing I'll say at the out front, no apologies. I'm not going to make any. And so there's no apologies on your part either. I have talked with members of the public in public forums about nuclear power for a couple of issues that went on in the industry. Almost had an opportunity to meet Hillary Clinton too, and I missed that. I will tell you what she said. She's pertinent during that meeting that I wasn't there. Let's see. So let me jump in. I made a little presentation. I'm going to step through it if I can, because it's going to help me keep my thoughts in one place. Nuclear power, goodness gracious. So that was just after TMI2. When I got hired, I actually went to a coal plant for a year, actually a little longer than a year. I was there a year and a half. I really liked Asheville and I really wish I could have stayed up there in some ways, but that's where we were. And I got to see what it's like to produce electricity by burning coal as well. So you can do the math. My final retirement, to use Serena's terms, my evolution occurred in 2017. That was the last time I was paid for doing any work in the nuclear business. So you can do the math for how long I was in the business. I was there, worked in numerous different states, several different sites from Florida, South and North Carolina, and New Jersey. And I spent a lot of time. In fact, every function that I did, that last bullet might lead you to believe that I couldn't find a job. I never knew what I was going to do when I grew up. But of those functions, I think the one I enjoyed the most was the environmental and chemistry. I have a degree in chemistry. My last couple of jobs were in engineering. They were fun too, but environmental and chemistry was great. I really enjoyed it. So during that period, I was responsible not just for radiological environmental issues, but for migratory birds, for fish and wildlife, for all the permits that go on to a big industrial site. So as I was worrying about how this particular form might be received, I said, well, let me see if I can figure out if there's any position among friends here. So I went back to the FCNL video that Terry just posted, and I was Actually quite pleased at minute 33, there's quite a bit of discussion on nuclear power. And that to me was encouraging. And in fact, I think it probably got as much discussion as anything during that particular. So that kind of led me, well, what is the big picture? You know, so the thing that was on here, I'm going to read it. The thing that we considered was the words in the bullet was moratorium on the construction of nuclear fission power plants. That was what was in the presentation. Larry said he paraphrased some, and I believe this is the complete wording what is in FCNL. Let's see, can somebody online, actually, James, would you mind reading that?
Sure. We urge an explicit moratorium on the construction of nuclear fission power plants until methods of safe disposal have been demonstrated and adopted. The safest possible methods for transportation and storage should be developed and implemented promptly.
Thank you. I know personally, as a 37-year person who worked in nuclear power, I'm a lot more at ease with that statement than I am just the first sentence. And the interesting, when I read that from my perspective, I read the until, the safest, et cetera, should be developed and implemented properly. I read at least that FCNL is kind of open to the idea that nuclear power may play a role in the climate crisis. And we're going to talk about that a little bit, because that's really the point. That's really the discussion. And a couple things in there. We urge the explicit moratorium on the construction of nuclear fission power plants. First off, Vogtle 3, which is in Georgia on the Savannah River, just received an operating license. So I'm not sure what to say about that. And Vogtle 4 is the last plant under construction, conventional nuclear power plant that's right next door to units 1, 2. So I'm not sure that I'm aligned even with an explicit moratorium when we've already spent $17 billion or so on each unit to eliminate some coal. So that kind of gets it to me. And then the other thing, again, I think there's some positive in there too. And again, I was just trying to find out. Next place I went is QEW. What does QEW say about nuclear power? So I'm gonna put this up. This document was approved actually in 2007, but it was reissued, we'll see, in 2020, in October 1st, 2020. So they reissued it a year ago. It takes about a minute. Can we read through this? Can someone online start that reading? A little bit small here, if you can see it.
I can see it. Approved by the steering committee of Quaker Earth Care Witness in session October 14th, 2007, Burlington, Vermont. Quaker Earth Care Witness cannot support nuclear power as part of the solution to harmful climate change. As friends, our peace testimony has long led us to witness against nuclear power because of its connection to nuclear war. Our deep caring for all creation leads us to affirm that witness, even in the face of growing calls for an expansion of nuclear power.
Somebody else, thank you, Tobin. Somebody else picked it up? I'll read the next paragraph. Based on everything we know about the current state of nuclear technology and our understanding of its impact and risk for people and the earth, we are strongly opposed, for moral, spiritual, and practical reasons, to current efforts to increase nuclear power. Additionally, we are strongly opposed to subsidies for funding new nuclear power plants, including proposed loan guarantees, such as those in energy bills currently being considered by the U.S. Congress. Can you read that, James, from there?
Well, not really, honestly.
I'll keep going here. While nuclear power produces no greenhouse gases during electricity generation In fact, significant amounts of greenhouse gases are emitted when the complete cycle of nuclear power from mining, milling, enrichment of uranium, transportation of nuclear fuel, and removal and guarding of nuclear waste, as well as the construction of nuclear power plants, is considered. And I'll keep reading. Nuclear power is extremely expensive when all costs, including subsidies, are included. We believe that funds proposed for more nuclear power plants would be far more effective in reducing greenhouse gas emissions if used for energy efficiency, conservation, and renewable power. Nuclear power is closely linked to the war machine in many countries. Cumulative effects of radioactive waste from nuclear power will be lethal, carcinogenic, and mutagenic to humans and all species for hundreds of thousands of years. Finally, given nuclear power's unique destructiveness, the risk of just one catastrophic accident anywhere in the world renders nuclear power unacceptable. And I'm just going to skip down to the bottom. So even on this QEW, so Jack Braden didn't really feel all that good about this from Southeast Yearly Meeting. And interestingly, I may have an opportunity to meet Jack next when I go on vacation to Florida. I'm going to try to meet with him. I know somebody, a friend, non-Quaker friend, who was friends with him. So that didn't make me feel very good when I read that. But it also, in fact, I'm not going to talk about how I felt about it because I'm going to ask you. Let's see. So, let's see, where am I here? Back over here. Other place that I looked for Quaker opinion on it, and actually was for this particular stance of QEW. And so the Intermountain Yearly Meeting, you all know Friends from that meeting? In 2018, they responded to that minute of QEW saying that Friends recommend a 3-year exploration of the affiliation with Quaker Earth Care Witness, providing financial support for 2 observers to help answer our questions and concerns. We charge these observers, and that gives their names, we'll find them too, to report back annually to Yearly Meeting on their experiences. Some have expressed particular concern over QEW's insistence on non-nuclear solutions to climate and energy problems, and the alignment of their decision-making process with Quaker process. That was pretty dramatic. Do you remember that? Did anybody remember that? 2018, it's the minute from 2018, 0615. So I'm going to put this back up. And teleprompters, I think. So there's what I just read. Down at the bottom, actually, here was a report that came back to the Intermountain Yearly Meeting in 2020 from Dick Grossman, and it's pretty long, but his report is at the very end of this. And so this was a report to the Intermountain Yearly Meeting from Dick Grossman, and he was an observer with Quaker Earth Care Witness. So, can you start reading something?
I sure can. You have my driving glasses on, I can read it up there.
Oh, is that right?
So,
and that's what's on the screen.
Okay,
So when you change it, you're changing the screen.
yeah, I'll read as much. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, has someone already volunteered?
I have.
Okay, we'll let them read, and then I'll pick up after them.
Just a few paragraphs here or something? Okay. So, report to Intermountain Yearly Meeting by Dick Grossman. IMYM Observer, Quaker Earth Care Witness. In 2018, IMYM recommended a 3-year exploration of affiliation with Quaker Earth Care Witness in our minute such and such. It was suggested that I and another person who has since left the region be observers tasked with reporting back to IMYM annually. Two concerns are mentioned in the minutes. QEW's rejection of nuclear power as a way of generating electric power, and whether QEW's decision-making follows Quaker process. I apologize for not attending IMYM last year, although I did submit a written report. My wife and I went ahead in a car crash on June 7th, 2019. Although I had relatively minor injuries and recovered rapidly, she's still recovering. I'm delighted there's another observer, Bob Schrader, of Tempe monthly meeting. He attended his first QEW meeting this spring. Let me speak to the two areas of concern first. QEW has not reconsidered its unit on nuclear power, nor do I remember any serious discussion of the subject in the past few years. I've had an opportunity to discuss the pros and cons of nuclear power generation with one of the people in IMYM who feels that all sources of energy that don't emit carbon are necessary. At this point, I think we respectfully disagree on the subject, but agree that this one topic should not be a reason for limiting affiliation with North America's premier Quaker environmental organization. I'll read one paragraph. It is difficult for me to be objective about the second concern expressed in the IMYM. Although I've been a member of the Religious Society of Friends since 1952 and went to a Friends school for 14 years, I have learned more about the Quaker decision-making process during my 20 years association with QEW than previously. My belief is that QEW follows our process well. I am hampered in answering to this concern because I do not know what prompted it. Okay, so I'll, Paul, if you want to take over, do you see where I'm at?
Yeah. For those who aren't familiar with the organization, Quaker Earth Care Witness is a network of North American friends, Quakers, and other like-minded people who are taking spirit-led action to address the ecological and social crises of the world, emphasizing Quaker process and testimonies. Recently, we have been collaborating with other Quaker organizations, including FCNL, QUNO, and QIF, to develop a strong Quaker voice and actions on living in right relationship. We have made a priority to support youth-led organizations that are working on climate change. Another priority is environmental justice. One of our concerns is that, as is the case with many Quaker organizations, our average age is the gray hair range. Despite the age of many of the members of QEW, we are making good progress. We have secured funding to improve the website so that it will be an excellent resource for friends. We found that Zoom worked well for our spring meeting and we'll use it again in the fall. For years, we have been concerned our travel to meetings increases our carbon footprints. Can't see any more text. Okay, where was I? Okay. Good we have secured funding. We found that Zoom worked well. Perhaps we will decide to hold some of our meetings virtually in the future. I would be happy to try to answer any questions about QEW, but suggest exploring the website www.quakerearthcare.org for more information about the work of the organization. Friends everywhere are becoming more concerned about the care of our planet, of the wonderful web of life that is part of creation and our only home. My conclusion is that affiliation between Quaker Earth Care Witness and the International Yearly Meeting would be beneficial to friends and to Earth.
Thank you, Paul and Howard, and I'm glad that Bob Grossman came to that conclusion, because I come to the same conclusion about QEW. So let's see. That made me want to go elsewhere. So it was interesting to me, the response, and I'm going to want y'all to think about what you think about both of those so far. One more place that I went that I probably won't be able to meet her or him, but there was this great paper that was written in 1998. I can share all these. This particular paper, just very, very quickly, I'm going to go to the table of contents. I'm not going to go through this whole paper. But if you go through the table of contents, these two Quaker authors go through in the year 1998 a very detailed discussion of the climate crisis as it was in '98 and their approach. one of the things, and the reason I put this up here, you may not be able to see it, but when they talked about the relative safety of the sources, the relative safe electric sources are wind power, solar power, geothermal, hydropower, and then nuclear power. Those are the safest. The more dangerous forms of electricity are biomass, fossil fuels, short-term dangers associated with fossil fuels. I've seen a fire, coal-fired plant. I've seen fires there, and fossil fuel power. So that was interesting. So I'm going to leave that. Let's go back over here. I think I figured out how to do that. I'm going to leave that link. And the interesting thing is when you read the story, she's very clear that she used Quaker values in coming to the conclusion. She's very, very clear that that was important to her, to them actually. And then the only other thing, a shortened version of this paper was in Friends Journal in 2008, I think. So there's the link to that too. If you want to read, I'll say, if I can say it this way, and I don't mean it this way, the other side of the discussion from a Quaker perspective. So, brings us to a query. Let's see, 1022, we're doing pretty well. So your concerns about it. So I broke this into two parts. I wanted to find out what are some Quaker thought and opinion, and that's what this first part. This next part, we're going to talk about some of the things that are likely to come up when you tell me what your concerns are, and maybe more a broader picture of energy consumption in the United States. So anyway, what are your concerns? What are your concerns about nuclear power and of the positions, QEW, FCNL, is there one that speaks to you more clearly?
Has there been noted improvement in transportation and disposal since 2020?
So spent fuel and transportation.
Transportation and disposal, yeah.
Yes, I am working at Carolina Power and Light, Progress Energy, which is now Duke Power, put me in a unique position of both putting spent fuel on rail as well as receiving spent fuel. And I put spent fuel in dry fuel storage. And lots of good stories about that and industry experience. So we're going to talk about that. I'm not going to answer it right now. Spent fuel, it's a good question, and it is a problem. It is a problem. Yes, sir.
Well, if I could really briefly answer the second query first, because it's a very brief answer. Basically, right now I'm disposed to be not in favor, but I'm open to being convinced otherwise. But I'll real briefly say what my concerns are. There's a spent fuel concern. There is and then one part of that concern is, this fuel will need to be stored safely long after none of the languages spoken by human beings are spoken in the future. How will that work? Also, nuclear power plants, as I understand it, have a lifetime. So they get decommissioned after, 40, 50 years? And then you have to come up with another one or figure out how to recommission it or something like that. So that seems to also, right now, I think 1/10 of the world's power supply comes from nuclear.
You're on the low side.
Yeah. At any rate, what I've heard is
electric power.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, electric power, yeah.
Electric power, the power energy, you're close, yes.
At any rate, we need to a factor of several times more nuclear power plants than we have now to, also the amount of time taken to actually get a nuclear power plant, approved, constructed, and up and running is a long period of time, and we don't have time. So those are some of my concerns. I think I have others, but those stand in for my other concerns.
Those will do for now. Those are good ones. Those are good ones.
And if I can just, this is maybe beyond this discussion. The only real solution is we cut consumption. But that's,
All right, let's see, Tobin, I see your hand up.
I share the concerns that have been mentioned so far, decommissioning costs, which has never really been set. There's always, of course, the problem with untoward events that have massive effects, but there's also the immense amount of time, effort, and money invested in order to create just one nuclear power plant or source, and that amount of time, energy, and money might be more profitably invested in sources of energy which will provide or battery backup for the sources of clean energy. So I think it's a tremendously big investment and has been all along, an immense amount of money invested in the nuclear power source, which has limited and timely effects as we reach the end of those plants that are already operating.
So accidents and cost is what I hear.
And complexity of getting the costs.
What do other friends think?
We have a nuclear power operation right now in Ukraine that is being used as a weapon, or was until recently.
Zaporizhia, we'll talk about it. I can tell you about the design. Fortunately, it is not the same design as Chernobyl, which lies to the north of Zaporizhia. It's a Western design. It's a Russian design that approximates the Western reactors, not Chernobyl, which had some very big design changes. Good point. So yes, accidents and especially military targets. Are they military targets?
And I've heard that they have implemented learnings from Fukushima to improve the response at this.
Yes. Learnings. Great point.
One thing that concerns me a little bit, and it's a little broader than the nuclear power, is energy storage. And the current technologies of the batteries that need very, and they're called rare earth metals for a reason, because they're rare. And the places where you find them are in places that are not well, the folks who have to mine them are not well cared for.
Or they're in hostile areas.
They're in hostile areas, yes. Yeah, so that, but that it's not directly related to nuclear power per se, but even mining of uranium, the origin of all these materials is an issue.
Yeah. Good stuff. All right. Let's see, I could either get up and walk out of the room now. I'm just kidding. Has anybody, let me ask this. So when I was at Sharon Harris, the group that was there during startup was NC1. They're still there. They actually, one of their rallies outside of the plant was, and this is North Carolina, which was pretty favorable. It wasn't the Northeast. But they let loose, I don't know, it was like 10,000 black balloons to show where the radiation would go. And they floated, downstream of the plant, down to the next neighborhood and everything. It was a media event.
It was what?
It was a media event, it got some attention. Has anybody participated? 3 Mile Island and it's okay.
Could you speak a little louder?
I can. Has anybody participated in a protest associated with nuclear power?
No.
All right. Just curious. I haven't either. I heard events, I heard cost, I heard spent fuel, and heard Zaporizhia. So we're going to talk about those. I see I've got maybe 20 minutes. So in order of these, and the one other event that I put on here, but then I took it off because it's not really a nuclear event per se. 9/11 had a huge impact on us. 9/11, I was at HB Robinson. I was the environmental and chemistry manager there. I was in the operational support center during an emergency drill. We were in a drill, and drills at nuclear power plants are serious business. And they're serious to the point where every announcement over the PA starts with, "This is a drill," because you don't want the operational crew to mistake it, and that's happened. The funny thing about that, and I'll come back to, is I have a shirt that says, "This is not a drill," that my wife gave me. That's now my dentist shirt. But we were in an emergency drill when 9/11 occurred. So it was going on, and we're in the middle of a drill, and that's serious, doing a drill at a nuclear power plant, but it was a distraction. And as part of plant management, we said, we're going to have distractions. You know, we're going to proceed with the drill, and we did cut it a little short, but that had a huge effect. I wanted to talk about these events, though. TMI 2, so that was roughly a year before I was hired, a little more than a year. There's this international nuclear event scale that is used often, and TMI was a level 5 event according to that scale. Chernobyl in 1986, Sharon Harris was not started. That was May 2nd, 1987, when we first went critical. So it was not critical after Chernobyl. The first thing that happened was there was a picture of the destroyed reactor put in the control room. Said, "Remember, always protect the core, always protect the core." We ended up doing an awful lot of training. In fact, one of the training, I kept the book because and I can't say that I've read the whole thing. I'll just pass it around. I don't have a picture of this. This was written by, who was the individual, Grigory Medvedev, is the former deputy of nuclear energy in the USSR. And so he was sent to Chernobyl when it occurred. And this was his official account that then later turned into a book that you can find on Amazon if you really want to learn about Chernobyl. Chernobyl, in my mind, was probably the worst of the three, not just radiologically why it occurred, and how it occurred, and the consequences of it. If you haven't seen the HBO miniseries on it, it's remarkably accurate. There's a couple, my wife that's when she taught me all about suspension of disbelief. And I had to put aside a few of the things in there, but it's actually pretty remarkably accurate. One thing about Chernobyl is it's an art. It was an art. There were 4 units there. They're RBMK reactors. It's a Soviet design that is remarkably different from the Western design. There is no containment. And they had this thing called positive void coefficient, that when the reactor was unstable and they attempted to trip the reactor, it became supercritical because of the design of the control rods. We got to learn all about that stuff. And really, more importantly, for all of these was the lesson learned. And you mentioned that, Eric. Fukushima, obviously, and so I'll get to that, but Fukushima was obviously a little bit different. It was started with a natural disaster. And that's bad. That makes me think of, on the West Coast, let's see, we don't have San Onofre anymore. We still have Diablo Canyon, which is due to shut down, in San Luis Obispo. I've been to San Onofre. I've never been to San Onofre. So they're on the coast. On the East Coast, we have a bunch, 2 plants that I worked at, Turkey Point and Port St. Lucie. I worked there, and the 3rd plant, it's not on the ocean, but it's up on the Delaware River, Salem and Hope Creek. Those kind of worry me. Sea level rise, how quickly, that is something that bothers me. But we learn more. What's that?
Or earthquakes.
Or earthquakes, yes. Especially in the case of Diablo Canyon.
Yeah.
But out of TMI, we learned an awful lot of lessons. And one of the books that I have it. Yeah, there it is. This one actually stays next to my bed. Well, not bed, my chair where I sit. Out of TMI in the United States, we formed an organization called INPO, the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations. And the thing that bothered me the most about TMI, there were a lot of human errors, but the ultimate cause of them experiencing a loss of coolant accident, that event occurred 9 months earlier down in Christian River in Florida. That bothered me. And that's why INPO was formed. And that's the tenet of that book. And that was something in my mind, and in the era that I came into nuclear power, it was very important. We are hostages of each other. If we make a mistake at this plant, it not only affects the public right around, it's going to affect everybody at every nuclear power plant if we mess up. Do it right. It's got to be done right. And when I can remember being, telling people, what are your jobs here? Because we always said we have 3 jobs. We have our normal job, we have our refueling outage job, we have our emergency plan job. So everybody on the plant site had an emergency plan. But ultimately, if you were really learning, you'd say our ultimate job is protection of the health and well-being of the general public from the plant. But I do want to share one other thing about these, some variation of these 2 pictures, which hang in my studio. It's hung on my wall for a while. I do have these electronic when I was working, so I'm going to put these up. And when we talk about hostages of each other, that's what these are all about. So you have 2 graphs. One's the East Coast and one's the West Coast. I will say, I can't say because I haven't looked at it. I will say it this way. Every plant that I worked at, we saw Chernobyl and we saw Fukushima. We saw them occur in that amount of time. And that wasn't just short-lived isotopes. If you look at these, if you're not a radiochemist, cesium-137 has a half-life of about 30 years. It's going to be around a long time. Iodine-131 has a half-life of about 8 days. So that just tells you it came across from the Ukraine to the East Coast of the United States and whatever the dates show on there. We saw them. We saw both of those. And we saw Fukushima. The stark reminder of how important it is to operate the plant. And I can tell you the training that came out of INPO, the NRC almost took training under their guise, and INPO was formed in order to improve training. Training was needed after INPO. Lessons learned very quickly. Human performance, there were human performance events. There's humans involved. There's going to be mistakes made. It's true. There were leadership, especially Fukushima. Fukushima Daiichi is about, I think it's like 100 miles away from Fukushima Daini, which is an almost identical plant that was hit by almost an identical tsunami. And they fared much, much better because of the state of their equipment they had. So there were some leadership problems. Design weaknesses, I mentioned Chernobyl. They had training weaknesses. And all 3 damaged fuel. Damaged fuel at all 3 never damaged butts. So that's pretty disastrous.
There's a question.
Questions
about that? Yeah, go.
I guess so my general emotional reaction to nuclear power tends to be fairly positive as a thing to help contribute to climate change. A worry that just came to me thinking about this, it's something that thankfully hasn't really impacted our world too much yet, but that I keep reading that people are very worried might be a big factor, which is cyber warfare. If to the extent to which nuclear power is heavily computerized, whether those systems are vulnerable to that sort of attack.
Great question. I can tell you this, Y2K was huge in nuclear power. Good grief, it was huge. And I can't really speak for the foreign designs as well as far as the infrastructure, but I can say that the computer systems that control, operate, or can impact safety-related systems or components at a nuclear power plant are, according to how we were supposed to do things under Y2K, protected from external, I mean, you can't access them externally. You know, I'm not an IT person, but they are protected. What's that?
They're isolated from.
They are, and they're
outside network.
And like anything, there are tiers. So things like I just said, safety-related component systems and structures, those are going to be isolated cyberly, if that's the right term. Yeah, but then there may be systems, for example, in the case of an event, you know, say we declare an unusual event. And yes, I've been in a couple of those. There's communications that has to go out and plant parameters and whatnot. So yes, the NRC and state, local, they have ability to do some monitoring, but not any control. Does that help answer? Yeah. All right, let's see, how much are we doing time? Let's see if we can do spent fuel quickly here. And then I want to do the last thing. So spent fuel. Yeah, it's a problem. I mean, we've got 80,000 metric tons. And that's just the commercial waste. If you add the military waste, there's more. And nuclear power plants are producing about 2,000 metric tons a year. We replace a third of the core every 18 or 24 months, depending on the plant. We had Yucca Mountain, and you know, there's a couple things overseas. Two things. In France, they reprocess fuel. The waste volume becomes much smaller. In 1977, we outlawed that in the United States. That was outlawed, and shortly thereafter is when 1982 the Nuclear Waste Act was enacted, and that was when the federal government said it's our responsibility to locate, store, and have a repository for nuclear fuel. And in 2011, it lost funding. So, and I think I may have put the GAO report in here. There's a couple different things, but it was clear to me that it wasn't a technical decision. Yucca Mountain was, in fact, based on the criteria, suitable place to store nuclear fuel. But there was opposition to it, a lot of opposition to it. So that remains an open problem, absolutely. Power plant. So what happens now? Let's see, I think I went through all of that. Let's go to the next slide. So where is it now? So there's 76 different sites roughly in the United States where there's nuclear power plants. There's 4 of them in Texas, 2 at Comanche Peak. Larry Kelly Mahaffey's son-in-law works at Comanche Peak. And it hadn't affected him negatively, nor me. I still look normal. So there's 2 here. There's also a repository that's been recently licensed in Andrews County out on the west side of the state for nuclear fuel. It's an interim storage. Go ahead, Melissa.
Why did we outlaw recycling or
processing of fuel? That's a great question. That gets into the tie to nuclear weapons technology. The concern was proliferation of nuclear material that could be made into nuclear weapons. Nuclear fuel can't be made without processing, and nuclear weapons are 95-98% uranium enriched. Nuclear fuel in a reactor is like 3%. So the concern was that developing nations or nations that developed reprocessing technologies, France was the earliest one, could develop material for nuclear weapons. That was the concern.
And has that happened in France?
Not that I know of. Well, you know, and the ties between military and nuclear, the nuclear power industry isn't clean there. TVA, Sequoia, and Watts Bar both have control rods that are designed to make materials for the nuclear weapons program. That material. So it can be done. In other words, it irradiates equipment. Let's see. So the solution is it goes in dry fuel storage on the sites, and a bunch of them. We have a bunch at each of the plants, and some is in the nuclear the spent fuel pools underwater.
Chip?
Yes.
Given our limited time, what I'd like to ask is, what's your experience and thoughts about it as an experienced nuclear engineer and the situation we're facing now? Is there something you could share about how you view things before because we'll have plenty of time to talk about this after the forum, but I wouldn't want to get lost in the details.
Yeah, so let me jump to this graph, because this tells quite a bit, and I hope y'all can see it at least somewhat. Let me see if I can. For those that can or don't, this is over time, from left to right is over time, and it starts at 1982 and it ends at 2021. The bottom three, the largest three, and what it's displaying is energy production consumption, and that's energy, not just electricity. So this is transportation, this is energy consumption in the United States. And so it's normalized over whatever the whole thing was. Keep in mind, if I was to non-normalize it, that graph would be doing this, because we are using more and more power every day, every year. But what this tells me, the bottom three at the bottom are oil, coal, and gas. That's fossil.
This lavender and the green.
The bottom three are fossil fuels. The bottom three, let me just simplify it. The bottom three for our energy consumption in the United States are fossil fuels. So Tobin, the answer to your question is this. Yes, I think that every Walmart should have solar power. I think I would love to see subdivisions that had solar power or something, Tesla batteries. Do I think that is going to happen fast enough to make those bottom three lines get small enough to avoid a climate crisis? I do not. I think the future of nuclear power is this. I think conventional fission plants are a thing of the past. Vogtle 4, if it ever makes it, will be the last one. Bill Gates has TerraPower and NuScale. I've got a couple of friends that switched over to NuScale, or these small modular reactors. In fact, NuScale's design has received NRC approval. It is approved for, the design is approved. They're maybe a tenth of the size of a conventional plant. They can be built more quickly, more cheaply, because it's a common design. But fortunately, we still have to deal with spent fuel. So my opinion, here's my opinion, Tobin. I don't think that we should absolutely cross nuclear off the table. And I think if we say that we do, like in FCNL, for example, if I had been there that day, I would have had to stand aside, because the way that it read, I do not support a moratorium on all fission power. I think it's early for that. I think it needs to stay part of the equation. Does that help, Tobin? I left 1 minute for the last query, which is really just thoughts. That's too bad. Very quickly, some things that you don't know. I mentioned Vogtle 3. Japan, after Fukushima, what did they do? They shut them all down. What are they doing today? They're starting them back up, and they're looking at small modular reactor technology. They're one of the largest consumers of electricity in the world. Energy storage, I mentioned about Anderson County, that's been approved. NuScale, construction license, TerraPower. There's a great video of Bill Gates talking about, I don't know if you're a fan of him, but when it gets to the stuff about their modular reactor, which is a sodium cooled reactor. It's pretty cool. China, South Korea, and the United Arab Emirates. I have probably a dozen friends who, when they retired, in fact, I had a job offer to go there, that work over in the United Arab Emirates right now. They're building a 6-plant site in South Korea and China. We didn't talk about Zaporizhia, but I will say one last thing. There is no plant, there is no fossil plant, solar, dam, anything that is built to withstand war. We've got to control war, we've got to stop war. And it's such a shame that Zaporizhia, that anybody, people, or a nuclear power plant is used as a terrorist method. I mean, that's really what it's all about. That really is bad. Time to talk.
Yes, sir. Do we have any more time? Or we
Maybe a minute or two.
I just wanted to just mention two other concerns I had. One is the amount of uranium that is left to be mined. It's fairly limited, and if we were to ramp up nuclear power production, it wouldn't last more than a few decades, I think. The other one is, assuming we have these nuclear power plants in place and that they can be run, well, that assumes social stability. That assumes people showing up to work at these nuclear power plants. And I just wanted to throw that out because we may be entering a period in various parts of the world where, just people can't get to or don't come to work to run these places. So that's my other two concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the availability, and somebody mentioned earlier lithium hydroxide monohydrate. It's a chemical used in nuclear power plants to control the pH of reactor cooling systems. Comes from Russia. That's where it's mined. It's got to be in lithium-7. The place where it comes is from Russia. So
That's a particular isotope of lithium.
particular isotope, yes. So that supply chain. But the only thing I'd answer is supply chain is that's going to be true for a coal plant. I mean, when I was still in the business, when we were talking about building, where are we going to get welders? Where are we going to get young people who can weld? That those crafts are going away. I will make all of this available if there's any interest in it, and I appreciate y'all's attentiveness.